What's going on, everybody? Hope you all had a good weekend. We are heading into the second week of training camp. And before I head to Latrobe to check out practice, which I'm really excited about, I wanted to preview the 2024 Steelers offense, just kind of look at things from a picture standpoint. And then we're going to go position group by position group and talk about the offense in general and just break this thing down in detail for you guys. Joining me today is my good buddy, Nick Martin from All Steelers, a frequent guest of the show. How we doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, my dude. I'm always happy to be on and ready to talk about some Steelers, man.
Heck yeah, I was really excited to have you on here and get your thoughts on this group as well. I know the offense has definitely been under a microscope so far during training camp. I've seen a lot of cool stuff. I'm so excited to get down there to Latrobe, but I know you're excited about this group as well, and really just to see what this thing looks like from an on-field perspective once we get into the preseason and all that stuff. Football's right around the corner, and I'm really excited about it. But just before we get started, everybody, just please make sure that you like, subscribe, drop a comment to help support the channel. All the support for the new sponsorship and Homage, as well as the new membership rollout's been awesome, and I really appreciate that. But without further ado, want to jump in, to the quarterback discussion. I know that generates a lot of headlines, and I know that's what a lot of people are interested in too. So, as someone who is equally as obsessed about the quarterback position as I am, I was really excited to have this conversation with you because I don't think we've really talked a lot about the quarterback state of the Steelers, just like in our DMs, like we've talked about a lot of other stuff, but not as much Russell Wilson and Justin Fields talk lately. Um,
Yeah,
but let's start with Russ. What do you think Russ brings to the table that gives this team or this offense a boost at that position relative to what we've seen in prior years, specifically over the last 3-4 years?
I think the biggest difference is we didn't know what Kenny Pickett was. We didn't know, and when Mitch Trubisky was brought in, obviously we knew he wasn't the answer. And I think with Russell Wilson, you're getting something that is a proven commodity, even with his warts and all. You know what you're going to get. You're going to get someone who's going to impress outside of structure and also give you headaches inside of structure because for the coaching staff especially. And we saw it with Sean Payton and in Denver. He had to change a lot of his offense just to fit around Russell Wilson. And a lot of the narratives around his time in Seattle have kind of changed over the years because of what we now know about his strengths and his overall weaknesses and how they had to acclimate to make him, succeed in the best situation. And I think Pittsburgh provides that type of opportunity, definitely, but it's nice to know what you're getting instead of not
Sure.
knowing what you're getting. And I think that's the biggest selling point with Russell Wilson, honestly.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned just the experience. This is a guy who's been around the league a long time. He's done it before. So I think with Kenny and, kind of with Mitch as well too, there was the improving aspect that kind of made you, curious about what it could be, but at the same time, we were still very much in the early stages of figuring out what they were at this point in their careers. But, I think really Russ, like you mentioned, the out of structure stuff, and I still think even last year in Denver, he looked like he was in a little bit better of shape. Looked like he was a little bit leaner, which allowed him to kind of get out of the pocket and maneuver a little bit more and, do some of those classic vintage Russ plays outside the pocket on the move because he's really accurate throwing the football on the move, both to his right and to his left. I think the way he throws moving to his left is something that honestly impressed me a lot when I was even watching the Denver film last year. But, I think it's the out of structure play and then it's the deep ball, right? Like all the, I think that Russ, the deep ball of his is honestly legendary. Like the way that he's
Yes.
made a living off of that. Like he's been one of the most accurate, deep ball passers really since he entered the league. And, not just, giving those guys chances, but also just the potent accuracy down the field in terms of throwing away from leverage, hitting guys in stride. And I'm excited to see what that looks like for the offense. Now, there's definitely you mentioned it. I think this kind of leads into my second part of this discussion, but what does Pittsburgh need to do in order to put Russ in a position to succeed so that he and the offense can avoid a situation kind of similar to what we saw kind of unfold in Denver the last 2 years?
I think we have to look at the blueprint Seattle set back in the early days of Russell Wilson when he was just starting out as a rookie in the early part of his career. And that was run the ball with Marshawn Lynch, establish the run, set up the play action passing game, which Arthur Smith is well known for. And I think that's one of the best things about that fit we've talked before about how Arthur Smith likes to use the middle of the field, which he's probably going to have to use less of
Sure.
with the two quarterbacks he has now. It's not just a Russell Wilson problem, but we'll get to Justin Fields in a little bit.
Yep.
Russell Wilson, the thing that you have to absolutely maximize is that deep ball passing, because if you're able to stretch vertically and you're able to attack un- underneath, um, in both the passing game, with the running backs and also in the ground game, you're able to create enough stress that the defense at least has to account for that. And they might open up windows like bigger in the middle of the field that Russ can
Sure.
actually potentially go to.
Yeah.
And, bootlegging him outside the pocket, that's where he's most comfortable because he's not having to see over these offensive linemen. Sometimes it's an interesting narrative with short quarterbacks because not every short quarterback doesn't necessarily target the middle of the field. I think Russell Wilson is a case of correlation where people went to correlation causation, and I think they there was a bit of a bit of a narrative where it's like, oh yeah, these short guys they can't see over the middle of the field. Well, Baker Mayfield could anticipate over the middle of the field. Drew Brees was incredible over the middle of the field, and we've seen
Right.
what Tua could do over the middle of the field as well. And I think the thing with Russ is that's just not his style. His style of play is outside the numbers, deep ball passing. George Pickens, Calvin Austin, they bring that type of element in the vertical passing game where you can have like your Suedo, Tyler Lockett, and your DK Metcalf, for instance. Like you have the type of pieces that Russ is familiar with, those archetypes that he can get the most out of, which is why I definitely can see Russ having success here.
Yep. And I think that like you brought up a good point about just the play action stuff. Like you even look at like the numbers from last year and I know these are like really basic box score numbers, but just off play action last year, he had 11 touchdowns, one pick. But the thing that kind of jumped out at me was the pressure to sack percentage. So like Russ was over 20%, I think near like 21% on pressure to sack rate. But last year on play action was around 17%. You mentioned like moving the launch point so that, he's not, in the same spot in the pocket for defenses to kind of attack. I think the gun run game is something that I've talked about a lot in terms of like this is definitely going to be important in terms of things that Arthur Smith's going to need to maximize because Russ isn't a pure drawback passer, like you mentioned, because of some of his limitations in terms of targeting the middle of the field, and he's just not overly comfortable in terms of getting there all the time. You have to kind of design it up for him. Like you mentioned with the play action stuff, I tweeted a clip of this on my Twitter account a couple days ago because I was looking at the pistol. I just wrote like a huge pistol article for Steelers Now. If you guys want some Arthur Smith stuff, definitely check that out. But dagger concepts, things like that, things that draw the second level defenders and create that gravity towards the line of scrimmage, those are windows that Russ can hit. Now if you're asking him to work a bunch of high lows or get to a backside dig, especially like later in the down where the pocket's kind of collapsing, that's not really his game. And like I think that the height thing matters more when the pocket starts collapsing. So what does that mean? It means the interior of the offensive line, which we'll talk about, is going to be really important, really pertinent in pass protection because they're the guys that kind of set the pocket. So in terms of for me, I definitely agree. Like the Steelers are going to have to be extremely efficient rushing the ball, but also like put him in positions to succeed. Now Arthur Smith does have some stuff I think towards the sideline and outside the numbers that is better than I kind of anticipated, but most of that stuff is off play action because like he's not a guy that wants to sit out there and just throw 9 routes all day, fades all down the field. But he does have some cool designery stuff in terms of off play action, half field reads. I think the way that I've kind of phrased it is putting guardrails on the offense is like in terms of like the play action, the bootleg, stuff like that. But I think that it's going to require definitely a good game script. And with Russ' situation, like he's coming here on like basically the vet min. Of course, the contract details are a little bit unique because of the way his situation in Denver unfolded. But I don't think the Steelers are anticipating him coming in to carry like some big load or come over and just put everything on his shoulders. I think he just needs to be a nice complementary piece to what they want to do in the ground game. But you kind of hit on Justin Fields a little bit. you know I think I am like you that I think that there is definitely a situation, a realistic situation where Russell Wilson plays well enough to put the Steelers in position to make the postseason. Um, But I also think that there's also a scenario where things don't work out because, we've seen what Russ has looked like for the majority of the last 2.5 years. And, while I think that he's still a startable quarterback, I also think that the Steelers have, one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league right now, someone that's young, that has a lot of, traits to kind of work off of in the event that the team does have to turn to Justin, let's say like whether it's right now, like Russ is dealing with a little bit of an injury. That's also something, as quarterbacks age, those things typically pop up a little bit more. Um, do you think that he can do enough to be the Steelers starter next season?
Think with Justin Fields, I have a much different outlook on this whole situation than most people do. And
Hmm.
is that I see Justin Fields more as a short-term solution, and the long term is kind of like that promise. Like, can he upgrade the aspects of his game that he hasn't been able to in the past? And we haven't really seen that yet. And that's why we have to kind of go into this with caution, optimistic caution over what he can bring. And how I view Fields is that similar to what the Eagles do with Jalen Hurts, you can bring the fact that the Steelers are going to be such a run heavy team. The gravity of Fields, whenever he is starting or whenever he's on the field on packages, the gravity is going to open up holes for Najee and Jalen Warren alike. And I think that is the most important thing is if Fields is that much of a threat in the run game, his short-term optimism comes from that aspect alone, and it will help open up the scheme more for their identity to be at its absolute best. And that's why I'm kind of like, and we talk about Russell Wilson's deep ball. Justin Fields is a very good deep ball thrower as well. That's where he excels. Outside the numbers is where he likes to target the in terms of his areas. And
Sure.
I do think he tends to be a little check down heavy, kind of similar to what Russ was in throughout his career. And that's
Yeah.
like we don't see like those intermediate plays as consistently as we want to see them. And I think getting those types of plays is where we're like, okay, there's a long term upside to work with here. And I think we're going to have to see him start an extended amount of time before we're like, okay, there's something here. We should extend him. This is the guy we should build around. And
Yeah.
I don't think the Steelers are approaching it with that sense. I think they're approaching it with caution, but slight optimism that this could work out. Like, like I know there was a meme going around where it's like it looks cool, but
It doesn't
it's
work.
broken. It doesn't work. Yeah, that's Justin Fields in a nutshell. And I think you can really make the short term work, but I think the long term overall is a lot more murky than people want to make it out to be.
Sure. I think the thing too with Fields, like being like a short term solution, like the things that he can do with his legs, like we've seen how dynamic he is with the ball in his hands, and I do think that there's gravity there in terms of like some of the stuff you can do in the run game, and I think like with Arthur Smith specifically, with him utilizing like the zone read, especially like in the red zone, I think that's a way to get Justin on the field, either in the short term while you're still starting Russ or something they could lean into a little bit more, kind of with him in the game. And I think with Justin, like you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like him and Russ actually have some pretty striking similarities. Like, and that's the kind of the funny things because I already see like some Steelers fans kind of hitching their wagon to one of the guys, and
It's
Russ is
pointing
my
Spider-Man
guy.
meme.
Yeah.
It's
But there's definitely some similarities to those two guys, like in terms of like the way that they like to win. They both are really good out of structure. They both have a great deep ball. Like you look at Justin's numbers last year, just throwing the ball down the field 20 plus yards. He was, I think, 23 of 52, but like his adjusted accuracy percentage, I think, was fifth in the NFL. Um, Last year at 53.8%. He had 18 big time throws, man, like 18. He was really good throwing the ball down the field, especially like I don't know. I really like DJ Moore, but I still think that like people were gassing up a little bit his situation a little too much, in my opinion, last year in terms of like what it looked like. And Getsy did do some good things in terms of playing to his strengths, but I thought they left some meat on the bone. So I don't know. Is this the offense for Justin? I think that this offense being like really play action heavy. I think that the way that Smith has shown at least a little bit of a tendency to use the quarterback in the run game, I think that those things excite me. But like you said, in order for him to be a long term solution, we're going to have to get more in the pocket in terms of being a more efficient, more consistent passer. And I think that that really boils down to me on a couple things. The process, his entire process has to be sped up, from the
Yes.
footwork to the mental capacity in terms of going through his reads and understanding like how to get through his progressions in a more timely manner. And then like you said, we've got to see a little bit more of a variety as a passer. Like it can't just be all deep balls or all outside the numbers. Like we got to see him be efficient, even in the simple aspects of the game, such as quick game. So I kind of look at him like the same as you do in terms of, I think he's a really intriguing lottery ticket because the Steelers spent absolutely nothing to get him. And that's why I like what the Steelers did at the position this year, was because they took two guys. Russ has had an incredible amount of success over the course of his career, but has struggled recently. They got him for basically pennies on the dollar, literally. And then Justin, you trade nothing to go get him, basically. So it's two good shots, and I think that both those guys at least have a good chance at giving them better quarterback play than they saw last year, which I think is at least a better spot than I thought they'd be in. If you were to ask me, 9 months ago where they'd be at, I think that this is a better room. So
This is
let's kind of
definitely what we wanted. This is
yeah.
definitely what we wanted.
Yeah. These are like calculated shots. Is kind of like the way that I've kind of framed it, is like I think that they're calculated shots that, who knows if they work out or not, but I do think that there's definitely some optimism there. Let's talk about the running backs, because I know they're going to be kind of the focal point of the offense. In terms of Najee Harris, I think a lot of the headlines and stuff about them declining the fifth year option and stuff, I don't think that that necessarily surprised either one of us. But I guess my question about Najee is, I thought Najee had a quietly pretty solid season last year. If you kind of look past like the first month or so when the blocking was pretty horrific. But
Not just that,
what,
his foot injury too. He was
yeah,
dealing with a Liz Frank
yeah.
for a good minute.
I guess my question is, have we already seen the best of Najee Harris, you think? And what are some things you'd like to see more of, I guess, to help him reach that ceiling? Or what's something you think he needs to do in order to reach his like full potential and what could be potentially his last year in a Steelers uniform?
I think it's kind of weird with the whole Arthur Smith thing because, like, in terms of philosophy, it fits right in with how it would, like, he's that type of running back, that bell cow who can handle those like 300 plus carries in a season because of how big he is, the ability to pass block, the ability to be a threat in the receiving game. There's a lot of things he can do, but outside zone is where he just does his overall game doesn't really fit because of his physical attributes. He's not the most like athletic running back. He can't really, threaten those outside perimeter runs as much as you would like. And I think that's a deficiency with Najee Harris that we kind of just have to accept. It was a thing with Le'Veon Bell to an extent, but what Bell brought to the table was like exceptional, like
Patience.
quickness,
Yeah.
patience. It was all of that. And Najee overall is a good back. Like I think his season last year is so underappreciated because he was dealing with that foot injury throughout the beginning of the year. He comes through the second half of the year, basically allows the offense to churn in a way that they had not been able to. I really think he was one of the key cogs behind that. And we saw even in his rookie season, like he can be the focal point of an offense. He can be the guy to handle most of the touches. And I think there's a very much a place for running backs like that in the league. But I think we're seeing more and more nowadays leaning towards explosive backs who can threaten the perimeter more consistently. And I think with this potential NFL draft, and how it looks at the running back position, you're
Sure.
going to see a lot of people kind of like argue like between, oh, which running back is better? Which one is the RB1? And you might see some people like look at like Ashton Jainty from Boise State because of how the league is trending. And I think we kind of have to look at those trends to kind of like understand why those running backs are being valued more and why they're having more success than like the traditional bigger back nowadays. Now, having having that breakaway type speed like a Derrick Henry, gives you that type of like ceiling. I think what
Right.
Najee Harris brings is a strong floor. And I think
Right.
we've kind of already seen that floor. And I'm not so sure we know if there's any more ceiling there to untap, as far as I'm concerned. I think he's just going to be a guy who can consistently handle a good amount of touches, and he can, get close to 1,000 yards just about he's 1,000 yards every year he's been in the
Right.
league. And it's crazy because he's dealt with injuries as well. And he's had to handle such a large load. So I really have an appreciation for Najee Harris's game, but I think the Steelers are moving in a different direction and they want to see, can he be a fit for Arthur Smith's scheme?
True.
And if they see it, maybe they offer him the contract, or maybe they just don't value running backs as much anymore. We
Yeah.
have to really see, because there are trends in the league, where teams are not always signing these running backs after their rookie seasons, and
Yeah.
it makes sense, but it's the reality. It's a business. As Tomlin talks about, Najee was, viewing it as a potential business decision, and I really think that's what it's coming down to.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. I mean, I think you look at it just from a statistical standpoint. Like Najee's season, like if you look at it, he averaged over 3 yards after contact. Healthy numbers there. He forced 53 missed tackles. 53 missed tackles, I believe, was like eighth or ninth in the league among running backs. I think you look at a guy who has been able to handle, over 250. He had 267 carries last year, over 250 carries. So you need somebody that's going to be capable of handling a large amount of touches, especially in this offense where they're going to be extremely run heavy. Like it wouldn't surprise me if the split between Jalen and Najee kind of gets close, even closer to 50-50 in terms of touches, but also like Najee could still have 250 touches if the Steelers are playing really good defense, they're in positive game scripts. Cause like I think Arthur Smith, he's well he's well content. Like if the run game's working, like he's cool to run the ball 30 times. You know what I'm saying? So, and not every offensive coordinator is like that. But I think the one thing about Najee's game last year that I saw that was a little bit pleasantly surprised with was just the amount of explosive runs that he created. I mean, he had
Yeah.
15 breakaway runs last year, according to Pro Football Focus. Just the 2 years prior combined, he had 16. Like that was a pleasant surprise. And I'm just curious on. I think for me, I agree that we pretty much know what he is, and when they drafted Najee, everything has kind of planned out exactly like I thought, with like very minor details missing. I thought the fan base would gravitate more towards Najee, and I don't really know that that's been the case, which has kind of been strange. But even if I think that we kind of know what he is as a player, I think the surroundings could be better, which could yield
Definitely.
better results. So, like, that could be the thing too, where it's like he may not take this giant step forward in year 4 in terms of him getting better, but he could just be in a better environment and it would produce better results. And like maybe that helps him get paid in the offseason. We'll see. But, this is definitely the best offensive line. I feel like he's been behind. And, that's something that, we'll talk about here in a minute. But in regards to Jalen Warren, like you mentioned, kind of the offense kind of moving in a certain direction, with the outside zone stuff and just Arthur Smith's scheme. What do you make of his fit in the offense? But not just this season, but he's a restricted free agent after the year too. So like, what do you make of his fit in the offense this year and beyond?
I think it's also kind of strange because Warren is like, he on paper he's the more explosive rusher, and like, he's the big play threat. He can threaten perimeter runs, but his splits on outside zone are worse than Najee Harris's. So it's like,
Yep.
it's hard to say if it's like a sample size bias or that he's not like quite familiar with that scheme and he's just more comfortable with, inside zone like gap scheme type runs. So I think there's a level. I think they're kind of going to have to approach both Jalen Warren and Najee Harris the very same way. Like they want to see who can be the one that can, handle this scheme, fit with this scheme the most and provide, the most like overall like opportunity. And I think with those two guys, you're going to get a lot of carries from both of them. And I don't say that lightly because like Arthur Smith, he used Bijan Robinson. He used Tyler Algier. He's not afraid to use his other back if his other back has a proven track record. And I
Sure.
think with Najee Harris, with Jalen Warren, they're going to get as many opportunities to prove themselves in this scheme. And I really think we're going to see either one separate, or maybe neither is truly a fit. I think it's weird with Jalen Warren because on paper he does, like, his skill set might seem like it would fit better, but
Hmm.
we just haven't seen it throughout the sample size we've seen of him running through outside zone.
Yeah.
So I have some I have some questions overall of the scheme fit, but I have optimism about them figuring it out with the workload they're going to receive.
Yeah, I think too, like that's been one of the interesting things. And I think it's, part of it is just how things work out, the way that we discuss sports. But there's been people that, have been kind of hitching their wagon to one way or another in terms of, oh, like this is
The
the guy.
fantasy experts, for
Yeah.
sure, they love
It's
to.
Najee versus Warren. And like, I don't know. I think they're both pretty solid backs, man. I think they give the Steelers a really nice
Yeah.
tandem. But, I do see people using the outside zone thing as a way to kind of differentiate between who they think is the better back or who's the better fit in the offense. And I just don't know. Like the Steelers haven't ran much outside zone, and I think a lot of that has to do more so with the running backs, but or with the offensive line, excuse me, than it does the running backs. But like, there's not really statistical evidence to say that like we feel extremely good about him being like a much better fit. The way that I kind of classify Jalen Warren, I think he's also a better downhill runner. So like
Yeah.
there are things in this offense that I think fit him really well. Like for example, I'm gonna go back to the pistol thing, but like the Arthur Smith uses pistol more than any offensive coordinator in the NFL, and running from the pistol allows you to take more of a downhill track. I think that that could be something that they lean into even more this season and help get Najee and Jalen downhill a little bit more on those outside zone, wide zone runs. Now, like just the way that like Sports Info Solutions like classifies like outside zone, they kind of split it up into a couple different buckets, like outside zone. Whereas, like, I think you get like more of a cutback. Whereas, like, your pure like stretch plays or things that actually hit on the perimeter, Warren averages like right at like 4 yards per carry, I think. But if you take those runs out, and it's a really small sample size, it's like 30 carries. But if you look at his other 120 carries, it's 5.7 yards per attempt. Like, he's been much better at everything else. And like, I don't like, it's not realistic. Like, the more carries that Jalen gets, his yards per carry will go down just because that's how things work in the NFL. You put more volume on players, whether it's passers or runners or receivers, the efficiency of those targets typically go down. And that's another kind of aspect I think that people are missing. But this is a really good running back room, and I think that I'm very curious on which guy takes, like you said, to the offense better, and like, can either one of them, I guess, cement themselves as like a, a strong RB1 heading into next offseason, not just to help get the Steelers to the playoffs, but also to avoid having to take another running back in the first round or potentially the second round, which I think is definitely on the table, even if, things play out the way that we're expecting to, just because how run heavy and just the Steelers' history of targeting running backs early in the draft. So I know
Yeah.
you and I are really excited about next year's running back class. We could probably spend a whole another hour on that alone, but we got to
We'll
keep it
make that
moving
an
here.
episode one day.
Yeah. In terms of like Pickens, I want to go to the receivers now, like just with Pickens being the primary X, step into that Drake London role. What's the next step in his development in your eyes? Things that you want to see more of, not just like him improve on, but what type of ways do you think they can get him more involved into the offense?
I think it's going to be interesting with George Pickens because, like, both the quarterbacks are kind of like adverse to the middle of the field, and like we want to see Pickens run more in breakers, more slants, more digs, and I think that's where we're really like trying to project a jump with him. And it's like we don't quite know how that's going to work with those types of quarterbacks, and like can Pickens, remain calm not getting the ball in those situations. And I do think there's some overblownness to some extent, but I do think there's subtle truth to, you know his issues maturity wise. And I do
Sure.
think Zach Oziani, he's going to bring a challenge to him. We've already seen it on day one of training camp. They got into a heated exchange. And, he's going to get that hard ass mentality that Kirby Smart gave him back in Georgia, and I think it's really they want to bring out the best in George Pickens on a play to play basis, and I think to get that you also need to give him less cardio routes that because he's going to be the primary X, he's going to be the primary read. You don't want him consistently running deep down the field. Now he's a great vertical target. He's a threat on back shoulders. He's absolutely like insane vertically in a lot of ways. He's not just shoulder threat. He can also burn you deep, and that's a lot of things you have to consider with George Pickens. But you can't just like ask him to run deep as like a decoy. You want Pickens to be involved more of the time so he can stay focused and not have those plays where he takes off, the play, like against the Colts with Trubisky, where he threw the interception and Pickens just kind of just gave up because he was just like, oh, it's way over my head. Like, and, you want less of that. And I do think there is that is something he has to improve on, but also the coaching staff needs to make it more of an effort to get the ball in his hands. And we might see his target per catch drop much more this year as a result, because he's going to be more targeted.
Yeah, I think too, like you mentioned, just him stepping into that role and like the routes that we could potentially see him run in this offense. And I think like a person to look at, I'll mention the Drake London role, but like Matt Harmon from Reception Perception does great work. And like he was talking about just London's role as that X receiver, like his route tree changed a little bit last year. Like instead of running, in year one, with that offense, like he ran more like slants, more digs. Last year, it was more curls, more outside breaking routes. I'm wondering if that's the kind of route tree that we're going to expect, going forward. But I will say, like, there are things that I'm excited about seeing him have more of an opportunity to do, like the quick game thing. Like I tweeted out a clip, somebody clipped it at Latrobe, but one of Arthur Smith's like probably his most common quick game concept is just called like Lion, and it's basically just double slants. But like there have been games that I've charted of Smith's where he's ran it like 4 or 5 times. So like we're gonna get the chance to see him run more of those, because it was like they didn't have a quarterback really last year on the roster that could hit it consistently until like Mason came in the last month. He hit him on some, and we shocker, we saw some big plays happen out of it. But I do think Pickens is interesting because you don't want to box him into just being this contested catch, deep ball threat or back shoulder guy, because like he can do more than that. And like I'm excited to see like what more there is to unlock, seeing him in a different offense, seeing him with hopefully better quarterback play. But like even like the deep dig routes, like something like that, like understanding how to set those up as an outside receiver is a skill. He just hasn't done it a lot. Not just like dating back to, even dating back to his days at Georgia. Like we haven't seen him run those type of routes yet. So what does that look like? I think there is some unknown, but I think that George is also a better separator than people give him credit for. So I'm excited to see him, like you said, cut down on the cardio routes a little bit. But, I think the talking point really with the receiver position has been like the guys outside of George, and are they going to have enough? There's been a lot of trade speculation. I think some of that's just social media driven, but I know the Steelers have reached out like to pretty much anyone that will listen, like, hey, if you have a receiver available, we will gladly talk shop with you. But as of right now, it's Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin really as the two most exciting options on the roster. I wanted to ask you about this because I know you were a huge Calvin Austin fan coming out, but also with Roman Wilson, what do the best versions of those two guys look like? Like if you were to carve up roles for Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin this year, like what would that look like?
I think with Roman Wilson, you want him kind of in the slot more often. You want to protect him from those press man looks. You want him in motion almost consistently, running those deep crossers, because like he was great on crossing routes. Like that's where he was accepted, because he was stretching horizontally about as well as you could. And I think with Calvin Austin, you almost want to see him. You want to see him be able to evolve. Like, is he able to stop consistently on those timing routes, like those curls, those hitches? And I think that is the most important thing with Austin, because if he can be that other, outside receiver, we know he can stretch vertically. We know he's capable of doing that. But, we've seen him win on slants in the preseason occasionally. We've seen him be able to do that, but We want to see if he can consistently be able to operate on a time to time basis on those stopping routes. And if he's able to do that, I think Roman Wilson doesn't have to do things that are outside of his capabilities
Right.
as of this current point. So with I think honestly, one of the keys to this offense is Calvin Austin or Roman Wilson. Which one of them is going to step up? Because I think there are two proven commodities in terms of who's going to get the most targets in this offense. But I do think one of those guys needs to step up to alleviate pressure from Pickens or potentially Freiermuth at tight end. There needs to be something to take that pressure off. And
Right.
I think somewhere between maybe 600 to 800 yards for one of them, would be a
Has to
successful
happen, in
season.
my opinion.
Yes,
Has to
agreed.
happen. Yeah, I think too. Both those guys I feel like have been getting talked up really throughout the offseason, just from various people, like whether it's the quarterback. Now it's that time of the year, like right, like everybody looks great in shorts. It just is what it is. But
Yeah.
you and I have talked about Calvin, and I was telling you this privately. I guess it was like a little over a month ago or something. But one thing that I kind of found out like after the season was that Calvin, his foot wasn't fully healthy last year, so like he was
Yeah.
still working his way back from that surgery, and he just never really felt confident in terms of like being able to stop on a dime, plant, change directions, and come back to the quarterback. And I think you saw that like on film, like he was awful on those comeback routes. And I think that we're going to see a better version of that this year because that was not what we saw at Memphis. Like
No,
that's
it
just
wasn't.
not what we
It
saw at all.
it was so weird to see, and I definitely think that's why you want to have optimism about him recovering from his injury, and
Right.
that and putting it on that, because I really do think if you look at what he provided at college, there was a more complete receiver there
Absolutely.
that we just haven't seen up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, because he was playing the exit at Memphis, like they're the
Yeah.
full. I won't say he was running like the full route tree just because that offense didn't ask him to do, you know, everything that you would see in a pro style offense or at the NFL level, but like it was much more than just like go routes. And like that's why I think that you saw a little bit of optimism that maybe he could be more than a fourth wide receiver at the NFL level. It's just because we saw him be the focal point of a really good offense in college despite his size. Now, I agree with you. I think like the speed element to both those guys fits kind of what Russ and Justin want to do in terms of launching the ball down the field, but they kind of get it done in a little bit different ways. Calvin is like I think Calvin's best work often does come on a vertical plane, but in terms of like he's going to have to be able to kind of use that vertical speed to be able to create separation underneath. I think in terms of Roman, his best deployment is in the slot, like on a lot of those deep crossers, over routes, and things like that. You mentioned all like the bootlegs. We talked about the bootlegs earlier, getting Russ out the pocket, working the deeper intermediate parts of the field because Roman does a really good job of like once he gets to the top of his routes, especially on those deep crossers, like he understands how to create separation in terms of like whether he needs to give a little rocker step. He's also really tough in between the hashes. Like he's willing to take a hit. Like I know everybody talks about like the blocking stuff too, and that's definitely a good part of his game. But I was just curious on your thoughts on that because I know a lot of people are talking about like there's definitely a chance that we get into a month into the season and like they just kind of realize that they're wasting snaps with Van Jefferson out there aside from when they're trying to run the ball. And that is something that I think could bite them like long term is just because like I don't think either one of those guys, even though I really like Roman Wilson's tenacity and effort in the run game, some of the stuff that Smith's offense asks that position to do in the run game is going to make it really tough just from a size perspective. But definitely interesting. We'll see if they're able to get something done, add another player to the room. But the options definitely aren't looking overall extremely great. But let's kind of move on to the tight end position because we know that's going to be a heavy part of the offense. Arthur Smith loves 12, 13 personnel. We'll talk about Freiermuth. We had him on the channel to talk some ball, and really my only question was like, what kind of season do you think Freiermuth's going to have? I am of the opinion that I think he's going to have a really good one, and probably the second leading receiver on the offense. But I was curious on your take on that.
I think it's very possible he has a career year this year. I really we saw even in the past, Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, they've targeted their tight ends throughout their tenures. And Fields last year, Cole Kmet had a breakout season for them. Russell Wilson back in his prime, he used to target Zach Miller quite a bit early on, and then like it was Luke Wilson and then Jimmy Graham. Like he liked targeting his tight ends more than people like to give credit. And I
Sure.
really think, and we've seen this with Arthur Smith, he is going to move Pat Fryermuth around the formation. I think one of the most interesting things when we talk about, Atlanta's failures last year, we all look at Kyle Pitts and the fact he just didn't seem to be utilized or didn't seem to just get the ball enough. And part of that might have been due to injury. And I
Sure.
think we kind of have to just look at how he deploys his tight ends. And for instance, what he was doing with Jonnu Smith. I think the moving around the formation, the way he tried to utilize him in that aspect, I think you could see a lot of that with Fryermuth. And I think Fryermuth brings so much to the table as a receiver. He's able to stop consistently. He's a threat as a yak threat. He's always going to be tough over the middle. There's a lot he brings to the table. I just think Fryermuth at this stage, he is in for a career season. I think the signs are pointing towards it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think like the big thing for me is I think it's just going to be nice to see him in an offense that actually values that position because I never really
Yes.
felt like he was um, a focal point of the offense under Matt Canada, and I think that was just a mistake, especially when you consider some of the times, especially like last year, where I know he was banged up, but Deontay was banged up a little bit in the beginning of the season, and like even when he returned, it was just like they just made no effort at all to get into football. But and I know like a lot has been talked about Kyle Pitts' fantasy production. Just a point that I continue to reiterate, man, is like he was not fully healthy last year. Like you
No,
really
he
could
wasn't.
not like not only could he could really like open up his strides to utilize his full athletic capability, but also like just him cutting last year oftentimes seemed painful. And then he came out right after the season ended and said he wasn't healthy. So I mean, I just think that does play into it a little bit. But in terms of like just the involvement of the offense, I mean, two teams in the NFL last year targeted tight ends more than the Falcons did. Like it was the Vikings and the Cardinals by like 5 attempts or something like that. So it's the usage is there. Now, obviously, when you have three tight ends on the field, they're more likely to get the ball, right? Because they're taking up a good amount of your eligibles, but it's going to look different than it did under Matt Canada. And I think with Fryermuth, you're already seeing some clips out of camp and stuff of him working in the slide on those like sail routes and stuff, which we've talked a lot about it. But he's been optimistic in terms of like the freedom that he's going to get. Like he's going to be more on the front side of the progression a little bit more, which I'm excited about. But I know a lot of people are kind of saying like, look, they're going to utilize more tight ends. Does that mean we're actually going to get to see Darnell Washington touch the ball? Do you think Washington has value beyond just being an inline blocker? And I guess my second part of that, if you don't, is that okay?
I think with Darnell Washington, it's always been very interesting because I think he is more limited as a receiver than people give him credit for, but
Sure.
he's not entirely like not able to be used in that type of role. I think there are elements to his ability to stretch the seam. He provides quite a bit as a vertical threat in that regard. He's also a red zone threat, but I don't really think you're going to see him be able to stop on a dime and give a rocker step at the top of his drop and
Sure.
beat a linebacker on an out route. I just don't think he's that type of guy. He needs to post up on someone, and that's okay because what he brings is a blocking threat. We saw what Mercedes Lewis did with the Packers, the Jaguars for so long. It
He's still
was
playing, I think, isn't he? Didn't he
yeah,
just sign a contract? He's like 39 or something.
it's something like that. Yeah, it's actually insane, but that's what we want to see from Darnell Washington. Just being a great blocking threat. There is nothing wrong with that, especially in Arthur Smith's offense, which is going to run the ball a crap ton. You want to have your tight end be able to block like that, be able to stretch up the seam, and be able to box out on those goal line attempts, especially because you're going to go heavy. You're going to go heavy personnel on the goal on the goal line. You're going to sneak Darnell Washington out, and he's going to like box someone out, get it for a
Yeah.
touchdown. That's fine. You don't need Darnell Washington to be this focal point in the receiving game for him to be a successful draft pick, to be
Yeah.
a successful player for them.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. I think like you kind of matched kind of my thoughts on that. It's like I think people are saying like in order to look at that pick as a success, even as a third round pick, like he's got to go out there and catch 35, 40 balls. And I just don't think that that's going to be the case. Even when he was drafted, and I was probably too high on him in the draft. I ended up, I think, with him as like a top like 45-ish player when we wrapped it up. And I think, the thing that I go back to is like, even if he never catches 25 balls, like I still think he could have a really long, productive career because he has the length, the size to completely overwhelm defenders at the point of attack. And the way that you can utilize that in terms of getting him into the core, setting the edge, like I think that those things are really nice. And like he can help you too in terms of like helping in pass protection, helping, max protect, things like that. But I do think that the one area that I want to see him evolve more, well, I guess it's kind of two, is I do think that there are missing the boat a little bit on maybe some potential red zone touches. Russ was really good in the red zone, but like he's one of the things I like about Russ is like he will give some jump ball opportunities. And those 50-50 shots aren't always great, but when you got a guy that's 6'7", I just want to know if Darnell can do it. Like we didn't
Yeah.
really get the chance to see it at Georgia. I'm just curious if there is a path to him becoming, a 4 or 5 touchdown guy, just to where like he can jump over linebackers and things like that and use his length, his wingspan. And then like I do think that there will be some plays this year, hopefully, where they can get him on kind of the backside of bootlegs, get him in the flat, because we did see like some of his best moments as a receiver last year, or at Georgia, I should say, working the seams at like just straight line vertical and then in the flats, like where he's able to basically run in a straight line because he's got a little bit of build up speed and because he's
Yep.
so, thick, so powerful, especially in his lower half, like he can run through tacklers. So I do think that there's a path to, maybe he only catches like 20 balls this year or something like that. But I think that would be like best case scenario in terms of his utilization as a improving blocker from a technique standpoint, but also like providing some value, as a receiver. But we'll see what that looks like. I know we're running short on time here, so we'll have to speed through the offensive line a little bit. But just in reference to the offensive line, just give me what you're most excited about and what scares you the most.
The rookies, the development of Broderick Jones, and then the Steelers' insistence on not knowing where to put Broderick Jones, and then having Nate Herbig start at center, and then having Troy Fautanu having to earn it against Dan Moore.
Yeah.
I'm gonna lose it just when they do that, because you need to see the chemistry built up over time, and I think you
Especially in the
really,
zone run game.
yes, you need that. Especially it's frustrating. You can't just um the thing with the Steelers, they did this with Joey Porter Jr. and it kind of worked out, but it
Sure.
doesn't always. Like, you have to be careful about not having your guys be able to build up chemistry together, especially if this is going to be your starting offensive line for the
Sure.
foreseeable future. We don't, like, sure, we might not really know if Nate Herbig is a good center or something like that, like, but it's very unlikely that he's going to be better than Zach Frazier long term. So why would you want to play around with that idea? It just doesn't really make sense. And Broderick Jones not knowing where he's gonna play and having to deal with dealing with muscle memory potentially in, like, because there's difference between playing on the left and playing on the right. You're using different muscles, and he's already got technical problems as a pass protector.
Sure. Yeah.
Make a commitment and let him figure it out. Let him get the technique under wraps. I don't know, man. I don't know if it's a Pat Meyer thing, but it just drives me insane. It's definitely frustrating, and the most frustrating example, obviously, is Kevin Dotson going to the Rams and having the success he did, as at his most natural position. And I think the Steelers, they just can't mess around. So I'm scared, I'm optimistic, but they got to figure this out.
Yeah.
They can't keep doing this in training camp.
I think the thing that I'm most excited about is I just think that, it's a really basic statement, but I just think that the collection of talent that they've got on the offensive line is better than it's been really since, I would say, probably like 2018. Like 2017, 2018 is probably like the last time they've had a group that's been this uniquely talented. Now, obviously, it's going to take these guys a little bit to gel, but I do think that they've got two really solid guards. I'm optimistic that Zach Frazier's, technical ability, his wrestling background, his football IQ, competitive toughness is going to lead to a easier transition than we've seen from, guys that have came out in the past at that position. Even if I'm not sure about the total ceiling of what it looks like, when he reaches his peak, I still think he's going to be a good player. I think that the thing, and Brandon Thorne and I like broke down the offensive line like in incredible depth, a couple of weeks ago. But I think that the thing that I've settled on that scares me the most is what happens if Broderick Jones doesn't take a step forward on the left side. And it kind of goes back to your point. It's like, I think they're kind of just messing around, like making him like the swing tackle, but he's also going to be the starting left tackle. We've got some pass protection issues. Like one of the things with Broderick that was kind of concerning when I went back and watched his film, I think it was a couple weeks ago, he wasn't even hitting his landmarks in pass pro. Like he was getting beat with speed. And like when you start getting beat with speed and on the inside track, like that's just a bad combination. Like you're not gonna be able to cut off anything. So I think that moving him to the left side is gonna be better for him. But at the same time, how is he supposed to get comfortable in that muscle memory aspect of it, like you said, if you're consistently having him flip sides? And then like my
Yeah.
question is like, you're gonna be throwing Fautanu on the right side, which he hasn't really played, like I don't think really since high school, which is fine. Like you were gonna have to do that in order to draft him. Like
Reportedly,
someone's gonna play
quick.
there. Go ahead.
Reportedly, in practices at Washington, they used to flip Troy Fautanu
I
and
saw
Roger
that.
Rosengarten, and Fautanu would play on the right side, and Rosengarten would actually play on the left during practices.
Yeah.
So that's at least something to keep in
Yeah.
mind.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think too, like it just like Broderick to me has always been a guy that I looked at as from a pass protection standpoint. Like he is going to be a 3-year project. My concern is like, are they giving him the best shot to take a step forward this year with the way that they're having him practice? I don't necessarily believe that. And then if he does have a year, like let's just say he struggles in pass protection this year, like he did last year at right tackle, then what do you do? You know what I'm saying? Because you've got a guy sort of playing out of position on the right, but he's going to be hopefully Fautanu catches on quick, and hopefully he's comfortable by the end of the season over there. But then I think it puts a lot of pressure on that year 3 jump, and I know that progression and development isn't linear, but I do want to see a step forward for Broderick in the pass protection department. It just scares me the way that they're going about this. That's all
Yeah.
I'll say. So without going on too much of a longer rant about that, but just kind of before we wrap things up, man, I just got 2 quick questions I wanted to kind of get your take on. But which player are you going to be watching the closest in preseason on the opposite side of the ball?
All right, so preseason last year kind of traumatized me. So this year, I'm just
You
gonna
and
go back.
everybody else.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm just gonna go to what I usually do. I'm just gonna pay attention to the rookies. What traits do they show? Do they look comfortable? What type of roles are they playing? Like that's the most important thing for me. The results aspect of the preseason, it doesn't matter if you go 4-0. It doesn't even matter if your offense looks amazing in the preseason and tries to gaslight you into thinking that anything was going to change with your offense last year. But that's for that's in the past at
Sure.
this point.
Yeah.
But I just want to see how that's going to look. How does Frazier look at center? Whether it be second team or first team, you know, playing, playing along that offensive playing that along that offensive line? How does he look in pass protection? Does Fautanu look comfortable on the right side? How are
Sure.
they using Roman Wilson? How's he progressing? Like, is he playing outside during these types of exhibition games? And how does he look in that role? Just new information. We just
Yeah.
want to see new information so we can know how to approach this whole thing, what to expect.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing is with looking at your second year players, your rookies, you want to see how they're progressing. And that's how I'm taking it.
Yeah.
I'm not looking at the results aspect. I'm not even going to look at the scheme. I don't trust anything after last year.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I mean, for me personally, I'm looking forward to the scheme part of it, but that's just my like, my inner nerd more than anything else. But I think
That's
my actual answer is Fautanu. I think that he's the most important aspect to how this thing could look next year in terms of like the newcomers. Now, I think the most fun aspect of preseason is probably going to be watching Justin Fields against these second string defenses at this point, because I think he has a chance to provide some really exciting plays. And, the preseason, like, unless you're like a really hardcore nerd, and, a lot of people on my channel, I know they're missing football, like, on an extreme level, but unless you're a hardcore nerd, some people like to tune out the preseason. I think it's fun, but I think Justin could make it even like more fun just with his athleticism, some of the big plays we could potentially see. But last question, man. Before I get you out of here, in order for the Steelers to win a playoff game, the offense must fill in the blank.
They need to be multiple. Can they threaten you enough in the passing game? Is their run game going to be a dominant threat that they can build their identity around? That's going to be the key aspect. Can they get enough out of Calvin Austin or Roman Wilson just to be enough of a threat to take off the pressure in the passing game? Can they stretch the defense vertically with the deep passing arms of Russell Wilson and Justin Fields? The play action, everything we kind of just went over. Can they just do what we think they can do within the confines of the offense? They can win a playoff game.
Yep.
I do think it is very possible. It might come down to one of those guys, opening it up the run game a little more with their gravity as runners, with like Fields or Russell Wilson. But I do think it is possible this year. I do think it is possible.
It pretty much matches like my answer to that too. Like, I've just been saying, like, stay the course. Like, I think that the Steelers are going to have to be extremely efficient running the ball, and then they're going to have to find the explosives with the play action passing game, the deep passing game. But I think, positive game scripts, being able to stay the course, establishing that ground game, and then working the play action, get the explosives off of it. I think that's the formula, man, because I think that we're both pretty optimistic about the defensive side of the ball and what the stability that they're going to provide over there, because I think that that's a unit that really doesn't have a ton of holes. And obviously we know about some of the foundational pieces that they've got over there. They've got some true like impact players that, change the dynamic of, how we look at the game. So with Watt and Minka and all those guys. But just before we get out of here, man, like tell the people where they can find you.
They can find me at allsteelers.com with Fan Nation. And my Twitter handle is obviously right there at the McNarton. I will tweet out my thoughts on draft prospects, the Steelers. You'll always see me rambling during the games. And, if you want your live analysis, I got you.
Yeah, Nick's one of the best football minds in the biz, not just for the Steelers, which he covers, but also with draft prospects. Like, he's consistently giving me guys in terms of like people that I need to look out for, and he's definitely ahead of the curve on that stuff. So y'all make sure y'all give him a follow. As for me, my goal is I'm going to be able to hopefully get another video to you guys before I leave for training camp later in the week. We'll see what that looks like, but I definitely appreciate your guys' support. Like I said, with everything we've got going on, all the announcements we've had over the last week, just make sure on your way out, man, please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop me a comment, let me know what you guys think, not just about, the video itself, but what you guys think of the offense. Like, what are your expectations? Tell me what you guys are feeling. So without further ado, I'll check you guys next time. Peace and love.